Our readings today are two parables. One from the Old Testament and a second one from the New Testament. The first one is the parable of the trees that held an election in the forest. That is from our first reading from Judges chapter 9, verses 6 to 15. And the second one, the parable of the Vineyard Workers from our gospel reading, Matthew 20, verses 1 to 16. Well, since most likely naman you are already familiar with the parable of the Vineyard Workers in today's gospel, I hope you don't mind that I focus my reflection instead on the less familiar parable of the trees in our first reading, and which I also call Jotham's Curse, ang sumpa ni Jotham. The storyteller puts a parable in the mouth of Jotham. Who is Jotham? Well, Jotham is the only surviving legitimate son of Gideon, also known as Jerubbaal. But I think you would remember Gideon. He was in our first reading yesterday. He is the Israelite champion and hero whose story we heard. You know how he led the Israelites heroically in the fight against the Midianites. The parable is addressed by Jotham to the people of Shechem, who were responsible for putting their kinsman Abimelech in power. They were responsible for electing him as leader of Israel. And if I may summarize immediately, the basic moral of the story is simply this: people will get the kind of leaders they deserve. People get the kind of leaders they deserve. Abimelech was himself an illegitimate son of Gideon, meaning a half-brother of Jotham. But unlike Gideon, who ruled over the Israelites with righteousness and justice, well, this new leader, who was a fake leader, Abimelech, whom the people of Shechem had unanimously supported because he was popular, turned out to be a bully, a very vicious man. The people of Shechem had favored him as a leader. They wanted a strong man, all because he was a native of their own city. But the moment he assumed his power, he showed his true colors. He began to abuse his authority. He had no respect for the law. He lorded it over them. He used the funds in order to hire goons and killers in order to keep himself in power. He also made sure he eliminated all opposition to his government, especially the other potential contenders to his position. And so, he had all the 70 sons of Gideon, wow, 70 sons of Gideon, murdered. Isa lang ang nakaligtas, except for one, Jotham, who fortunately was able to escape. And in today's reading, we hear about Jotham standing boldly and confronting the people of Shechem at the sacred mountain of Gerizim. You see, if the most sacred place of Judah was Mount Zion in Jerusalem, where Solomon later built a temple, for the people of the north, the Israelites of the north, it was Mount Gerizim. I hope you remember that Samaritan woman who argued with Jesus and who insisted that the mountain of Gerizim was the proper place of worship. Well, now let's go back to the story. Jotham is standing on that mountain, and he denounces the people of Shechem for choosing the wicked, the bully, Abimelech, as their leader. And speaking like a bold prophet, Jotham spoke to them an oracle of doom in the form of a parable. Now, I'm sure you would like to review the parable. Here is a quick summary of the parable. Once there was a conference among all the trees in the forest. Nag-consultation yung mga punong kahoy. They wanted to have one of the trees to rule as king over the forest. And they began to consider the possible candidates, one candidate after another. But unfortunately, all of them begged off. First, they considered the olive tree, but the olive tree begged off because it did not want to give up its precious oil. Second, they considered the fig tree, but the fig tree also begged off. It did not want to give up its sweet fruits. And thirdly, they also considered the grapevine, but the grapevine also begged off. It did not want to sacrifice its precious wine. In the end, they offered the kingship to the buckthorn tree. The buckthorn tree, a useless tree. The buckthorn spoke to them. Really? You want me your king? I warn you, he said. I tell you what I'm going to do if you make me your leader. I will make sure that all of the trees of the forests would take refuge under my shadow. And if you don't, I'm going to cause fire to burn down the whole forest, he said. Wow. Imagine Jotham talking to the people of Shechem. And the people of Shechem did not realize that by narrating this parable to them, Jotham was putting a curse on them. Isinumpa sila for electing the tyrant Abimelech as leader, even if they knew him to be a murderer and a bloodthirsty tyrant. He was warning them that they had made a big mistake and that this man was going to destroy all of them and that this leader was going to cause the whole nation to fall apart. This was the man who had killed all of his brothers. Yes, all the other 70 sons of Gideon, except him. And sure enough, after just about 3 years, the curse of Jotham began to come true. And the elders of Shechem would realize the terrible mistake that they had done of having elected Abimelech, the tyrant, as king. And they would make a desperate effort to replace him with another leader named Gideon. But too late, the hero, Abimelech, would immediately suppress their act of rebellion, and he would pursue them even if they sought sanctuary in the crypt of a temple called El Berith. You know what he did? This murderer? He ordered his goons to cut down the bushes and to cover all the passages to the crypt and set the bushes on fire. He massacred all the people inside the crypt by suffocating them with smoke, and he had their cadavers cremated inside. Honestly, I had goosebumps while reading this terrible story. It made me think of what Hitler did to the Jews during the Second World War. How he also had them killed inside gas chambers, millions of them, and had them cremated thereafter. But in fulfillment of Jotham's curse, Abimelech would meet his tragic end. And ironically, he would meet his end in the hands of a woman. Ang galing, no? We read about it in the book of Judges, chapter 9, verse 53. I'm not inventing this. Let me read it. Now a certain woman cast the upper part of a millstone down straight on the head of Abimelech, and it fractured his skull. And so he fell down. He wasn't dead. He was just disabled. But you know, his pride was hurt when he realized it was a woman who struck him down. And what did he do? He ordered his own soldier, his armor bearer, to finish him up with a sword, so that thou it would not be said in history that a woman had defeated him. Ay nako, what a strange and violent story about a people who got the leader they deserved. How they pay a huge price for choosing a tyrant for their king. Nakita ninyo ang hinahanap ninyo. It was too late when they finally realized their mistake and regretted their choice. Not only would this wicked leader massacre his own people, he would destroy the entire nation and leave it as a pile of ruins before he himself met his tragic end. Makapanindig balahibo. The hair-raising parable is a curse, a prophetic curse. Dear brothers and sisters, I leave it to your imagination to figure out the lessons that this parable might be able to teach us, especially now that we are preparing to elect new leaders for our country in just a few more months.